It's not a joke anymore. Tottenham are now at serious risk of relegation. The 9th richest football club in the world, with the most expensive purpose-built football stadium of any team on the planet, and the 11th highest average attendances, could well be playing second-tier football next season. There is a non-zero chance that these two stadiums will belong to teams in the same division in 2 months' time. That's despite the fact that Spurs are the reigning Europa League winners, and not only that, they are still in this season's Champions League, having ranked as the 4th best team in Europe in the competition's league phase, above Barcelona, Man City, PSG and Real Madrid. It's a funny old game, isn't it? Though, admittedly, Spurs fans could be forgiven for not finding it all that amusing at the moment. Hey, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Multiple friends of mine, not to show off or anything, have asked me over the last week whether Tottenham will be the biggest club ever to have been relegated for entirely sporting reasons, and whether it would be the most shocking non-administrative relegation in the entire history of the sport. Admittedly, they didn't phrase the question quite like that. My answer, on both fronts, would be no. Manchester United, Liverpool and Arsenal, the 3 biggest and most successful clubs in English football, have all been relegated, a combined 9 times between them, as have the likes of Bayern Munich, AC Milan and Marseille. So those are some of the biggest clubs ever to have been relegated, but they weren't necessarily the most shocking. Bayern Munich had only won 1 German championship, over 20 years earlier when they were relegated in 1955. Manchester United finished 18th the season before their most recent relegation in 1974, so no one could say that it came entirely out of the blue. And Marseille just weren't an especially good team when they suffered 2 relegations in 5 years, during the late 50s and early 60s, either side of 3 seasons in Ligue 2. Liverpool, meanwhile, had an absolutely mental 5-season run between 1902 and 1907, as I'm sure you all remember well, in which they finished 5th in the top flight in the 1902-03 season, were relegated in 1903-04, won promotion in 1904-05, won the First Division title in 1905-06, and then finished 15th, only 6 points above the relegation zone, in 1906-07. Liverpool didn't so much fear inconsistency in the 1900s, as consistency feared them. So what are the game's most shocking relegations? Well, Villarreal, potentially similar to Spurs, were relegated while competing in the Champions League in the 2011-12 season, with a squad which starred the likes of Marcus Senna, Nilmar and Giuseppe Rossi. Immediately after finishing 4th the previous season, Fiorentina went down for the first time in the post-war era in the 1992-93 season, despite their squad boasting some ridiculous players like Stefan Effenberg, Brian Laudrup and Gabriel Batistuta. And who could forget in 2011, the greatest year of all time when it comes to shocking relegations, when a Sampdoria team in the Champions League, having just finished 4th, a star-studded Deportivo La Coruña squad, 8-time league and title winners Monaco, Japanese powerhouses Gamba Osaka, and Colombian giants America de Cali were all relegated in the same season. There will be more honourable mentions later on, but for now, excluding, to be absolutely clear, any administrative or enforced relegations which were imposed as sanctions or punishments, like Juventus, Rangers, or 1994 Marseille, because I think they're a bit different, here are 7 of the most shocking and unexpected relegations of all time. 7th, Leeds United, 2003-04. Probably the closest analogue in English football to Tottenham's current woes. If a Big Six were talked about and existed in people's consciousness in the early 2000s, then Leeds United probably would have been in it. Title winners in the final First Division season in 1991-92, for 5 years between the 1997-98 and 2001-02 seasons, Leeds finished as high as 3rd and never finished lower than 5th. They also had the 8th highest average attendances in the Premier League, above Villa and Spurs. They reached the 2000-2001 Champions League semi-finals, and they were reported to have the 12th highest wage bill in all of world football. Unfortunately, finishing 4th and 5th, at a time when only the top 3 in the Premier League qualified for the Champions League, wasn't enough to support the enormous budget that Peter Ridsdale had amassed at Ellen Road, borrowing tens of millions of pounds against the club's future earnings. Leeds plummeted from 5th to 15th in the 2002-03 season, before dropping out of the top flight entirely for the first time in over 20 years in 2004, similar to Spurs falling from 4th to 17th last season, before potentially getting relegated this season. But unlike Spurs, who are a commercial juggernaut and have one of, if not the lowest wage to turnover percentage in all of world football, Leeds were hemorrhaging cash, staged multiple fire sales, and their existential economic crisis played a massive role in their demise. Nonetheless, Leeds were still relegated with some fantastic players, whether that be a young James Milner, an older Mark Viduka, or Alan Smith, and their relegation, having been so consistently competitive over the preceding decade, still came as an enormous shock. It took Leeds 17 years to finally return to the top flight, during which time they spent 3 seasons playing in League One. That's probably not what Tottenham fans want to hear. 6th, Cruzeiro, 2019. Forget English football's Big Six, Brazilian football has a Big 12, and only 2 of Brazil's so-called G12 clubs, Flamengo and Sao Paulo, have never tasted relegation. Santos suffering their first ever relegation in 2023 was described by some as the most shocking relegation in the history of the Brazilian game, for understandable reasons. When one thinks of the mythology and grandeur which surrounds the club, players like Neymar, Zito and Pelé, and having been the best team in the world during the 1960s. It was shocking, for all of those reasons, and Santos also competed in a Copa Libertadores final as recently as 2020, but it wasn't entirely without forewarning. Santos haven't won the Brasileiro since 2004, they fell to 8th in 2020, 10th in 2021, and 12th in 2022, before their 17th place finish in 2023 ultimately sent them down. Cruzeiro, on the other hand, who had also never been relegated prior to 2019, had not only finished 5th and 8th in each of their last 2 seasons, they had won back-to-back Campeonato Mineiro and Copa do Brasil crowns, the former one being Brazil's local state championship, and the latter the Brazilian equivalent of the FA Cup, and they were competing in the Copa Libertadores, South America's equivalent of the Champions League, during the same season in which they went down. They even topped their group, were the second highest seeds in the competition, and only lost to eventual finalist River Plate on penalties in the Libertadores round of 16. Even more remarkably, at the halfway stage in the 2019 season, Cruzeiro went on a 21-game unbeaten run at the start of the campaign, and were considered potential Brasileiro title winners as a result. A corruption and mismanagement scandal which broke mid-season, though, revealing serious financial troubles and prompting a police investigation, totally demoralised the whole club. Cruzeiro didn't win any of their last 9 games, even failing to beat Avaí, who were relegated alongside them that season, as one of the worst Brasileiro sides of the modern era. It condemned Cruzeiro to a shock first ever relegation, and it would require a takeover by Ronaldo, a graduate of Cruzeiro's own youth ranks at the start of the 1990s, to turn the club's fortunes around. It took 3 seasons, but they returned to the Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A in 2023, and have finished 14th, 9th and 3rd, in that order, in their first 3 seasons back in the top flight. They are back in the Copa Libertadores in 2026, as well as being among the favourites to win a first Brasileiro title since 2014. That's a bit more like it for Spurs fans. 5th, Atletico Madrid, 1999 to 2000. By every conceivable metric, Atletico Madrid's relegation at the turn of the millennium is one of the most shocking relegations of all time. The Spanish Giants hadn't tasted relegation since 1930, in only La Liga's second ever season, and just 4 years earlier, they had won a League and Cup double, finishing 17 points above their city rivals Real Madrid, and beating Barcelona 1-0 in the Copa del Rey final. In the 1997-98 season, 2 years before they were relegated, Atletico reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup, and their talisman Christian Vieri won the La Liga Golden Boot. Even more extraordinarily, in the exact same season that Atletico were relegated for the first time in 70 years, they reached the UEFA Cup quarter-finals and the final of the Copa del Rey after knocking out Barcelona in the semi-finals. In the league, however, Atletico were victims of a leadership crisis and an incredibly tightly contested season of La Liga football, not unlike Spurs in that respect. Over halfway through the season, Atletico were having a poor campaign by their recent standards, but they were still only 13th. In December, however, controversial Atletico president Jesus Hill and his board were suspended, pending an investigation into the misuse of club funds, with the government stepping in to take charge of Atletico's day-to-day management. Atletico's form collapsed, and in March, head coach Claudio Ranieri resigned. Despite Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank scoring 24 goals for Atletico in La Liga, which was the second most in the division that season, and an incredible 33 goals in 43 games in all competitions, and Atletico scoring more goals than Alaves in 6th and only 2 fewer than Real Madrid in 5th, Atletico weren't just relegated, they finished 19th, 7 points off survival, after going over 3 months without a victory from the beginning of February onwards. As an aside, can I just say, what a chaotic colour-coded European qualification league table that really is. Just absolute chaos. Very unsatisfying to look at. Anyway, Hasselbank was the main attraction, but this was an Atletico squad which also contained the likes of Jose Molina, Joan Capdevila, Santiago Solari, Ruben Baraja, and Juan Carlos Valerón. These were all full Dutch, Spanish, and Argentinian internationals. Atletico bounced back after 2 seasons, but it took the Diego Simeone revolution from 2011 onwards to turn them back into a major force within the Spanish game. I interrupt this video very briefly, and very rudely, for a public service announcement for anyone who may have missed my last video. My boss has asked me to stop making long videos on this channel, and to try and make shorter but more frequent ones, which is very difficult for someone with a chronic addiction to going off on wild tangents. It's like asking Harry Kane to stop scoring goals, Jack Wilshere to stop getting injured, or Tottenham to stop being Spursy. It's against their nature. Fear not, though, if you are someone who enjoys me rambling incoherently for the length of half a game of football, because I'm not going to stop making long-form content, in-depth video essays, or in-person documentaries about increasingly obscure topics from the world of football. I will just be uploading them to the Alfie Potts Harmer YouTube channel instead. So, if that's you, make sure that you're subscribed, as it would break my heart if any of you were to miss my planned deep dives into political interference in Hungarian football under the crumbling Orban regime, or me visiting a football club whose stadium is on the roof of a shopping centre. Those are both real video ideas that I have lined up, and there are already over 10 videos on the channel for your viewing pleasure. Right, enough rambling, otherwise this video will be too long and I'll be in big trouble, so on to 4th place. 4th, Manchester City, 1937-38. Only a few clubs have ever completed the rare feat of getting relegated, the season after winning a top-flight league title. Marseille, Juventus, and AC Milan all suffered that fate for enforced or regulatory reasons. Meanwhile, Herfølge Bull Club from the eastern part of Zealand and Denmark won the Danish Superliga title in 2000 and were relegated in 2001. Impressive stuff, for all of the wrong reasons. The biggest club to have done it, on merit, not requiring financial misdeeds or some kind of corruption scandal, or not yet at least, was Manchester City, for which I personally think they don't get nearly enough credit. Look, at the end of the day, anyone can fix a game or two here and there or go bankrupt, there's no real skill in that, but to pull yourself up by your bootstraps immediately after winning your first top-flight league title and get relegated, well, that takes a bit of flair and gusto. It is exactly this kind of silliness that prevents my videos from being as short as my boss would like, and that will henceforth be restricted to the Alfie Potts Harmer channel. Man City reached back-to-back FA Cup finals in 1933 and 1934, winning half of them, before being crowned as champions of England for the first time in 1937, scoring a record-breaking and genuinely remarkable 107 goals. The citizens proceeded to beat big-spending FA Cup winner Sunderland in the Charity Shield, and the goals kept coming the following season. Despite no notable departures though, this was a squad which boasted England internationals like Frank Swift, Fred Tilson and Eric Brook, Man City went down in the 1937-38 season, a year after their Manchester rivals, with whom they swapped places that summer. That was despite scoring a whopping 80 goals, which was the most of any team in the division, including title winners Arsenal. In every respect, therefore, this is one of the craziest relegations of all time. Following failure to bounce back at the first attempt, a major kerfuffle broke out in Europe, otherwise known as World War I, but the citizens retained their top-flight status the season after the war ended in 1946-47. Well done them. Third, Corinthians, 2007. Forget Santos or Cruzeiro, the craziest relegation in the history of Brazilian football, to my mind, is Corinthians in 2007. Corinthians are royalty of the Brazilian game, as one of the country's two best supported clubs alongside Flamengo, with over 30 million fans. They are record 31-time Campeonato Paulista title winners, and they've won the Brasileiro 7 times. Legendary former Corinthian players include the likes of Socrates, Rivellino, and Carlos Tevez. Tevez had just departed in actual fact, shortly after winning the Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A title, when Corinthians were relegated. Corinthians won the Brasileiro title in the 2005 season, and despite Tevez controversially departing for West Ham midway through the 2006 season, alongside Javier Mascherano, Corinthians still finished 9th, qualifying for the Copa Sudamericana. Corinthians had signed a 10-year deal with Media Sports Investment in the mid-2000s as a solution to the club's financial woes, but their relationship with MSI president Kia Gorobachan rapidly soured. Tevez and Mascherano were followed out the door by Willian and Carlos Alberto, as Corinthians burnt through 3 different managers in 12 months. In a season that started badly and only got worse, only 10 wins saw Corinthians relegated for the first time in the club's history, 1 point shy of safety. Corinthians secured an instant return to the top flight as Serie B champions the following season, and ahead of their top flight return, the club signed Brazilian legend Ronaldo. Despite having no knees, no pace, and being about 4 stone heavier than at his peak, Ronaldo still breezed past defenders with his unique blend of elegance and invention as though they weren't there, scoring 23 goals in 38 games. Though the union would unfortunately end bitterly in 2011. Corinthians rebounded emphatically though, winning the Copa do Brasil in 2009, the Brasileiro in 2011, and a first ever Libertadores crown in 2012. Reassuring for Spurs fans, I'm sure. Second, FC Nuremberg, 1968-69. It is debatable whether this is the most shocking relegation of all time, but it is certainly the most ridiculous and shocking. And also quite funny. Firmly in Bayern Munich's ginormous shadow within the Bavarian footballing landscape these days, in the 1960s, Nuremberg were behemoths in their own right. The scene of some very naughty rallies in the 1930s, and quite a famous international criminal trial in the 1940s, by the time that Bayern Munich won their second German championship, their near neighbours Nuremberg had already won 9 of them, while having a higher average attendance. Nuremberg won their 9th German championship, and their first of the Bundesliga era, in the 1967-68 season, in which their average attendance was at least 60% higher than any other German club. Max Merkel was the Viennese mastermind behind the title-winning Bavarians, managing to get the best out of the likes of centre-forward Franz Brungs, who ranked second in that season's Bundesliga scoring charts with 25 goals. Over the summer, however, in true eccentric Austrian style, Merkel decided that the Nuremberg squad was too old and stale for his liking, and desperately needed an overhaul. He dumped almost all of his title-winning team, including top scorer Brungs, who was sold to Hertha Berlin, and a raft of young guns were brought in to replace them. It was a risky strategy, and much like Operation Barbarossa, launched by another eccentric Austrian who made his name in Bavaria 27 years earlier, it seriously backfired. Albeit, it must be said, with not quite as devastating or far-reaching consequences. Nuremberg's form collapsed though, as they won only 9 league games all season, the fewest of any team in the division, culminating in their relegation. To make matters worse, as if that wasn't enough, Bavarian rivals Bayern Munich won their first German championship of the Bundesliga era, with a squad that was built around a talented core of young players, including Sepp Maier, Franz Beckenbauer, and Gerd Müller. The complexion and landscape of Bavarian, and indeed German football, would never be the same again. It took Nuremberg a decade just to regain their Bundesliga status. They haven't won another Bundesliga title since the 1960s, and they find themselves ninth in the second Bundesliga at the time of this recording. If only Max Merkel had stuck with his title-winning team, imagine what could have been. 0. Honourable mentions. I have mentioned loads interspersed throughout this video and during the introduction, and there is an endless shortlist so I can't possibly name them all, but West Ham in the 2002-03 season, featuring David James, Trevor Sinclair, Joe Cole, Jermaine Defoe, Glenn Johnson, Michael Carrick et al., Leicester City in 2022-23, with a wage budget almost as big as Tottenham's at the time, Real Zaragoza in the 2007-08 season, immediately after finishing 6th, with Pablo Aimar, Sergio Garcia and Roberto Ayala all in their ranks, and Hertha Berlin, straight after finishing 4th, at a time when some people were talking about them finally putting Berlin's football scene on the map in Europe, plummeting to dead last in the 2009-10 season, with only 5 wins and 24 points to their name all season, surely deserves some kind of recognition. Which is what I've just done. In fact, virtually every German giant has suffered relegation at some stage, many of them in recent years, a phenomenon which I have made an in-depth and fascinating documentary about on this channel, of the kind that will in future be found only on the Alfie Potts Harmer channel. In case I hadn't mentioned it. First, River Plate, 2010-11. I told you that 2011 was the year of shock relegations, but I didn't even mention the most shocking relegation of them all. Not just in 2011, that is, but I would argue in the entire history of world football. River Plate are one of the biggest football clubs on the planet. They literally have the world's highest average attendance, having recently leapfrogged Borussia Dortmund into top spots. They have won a record-breaking 38 Argentine Primera Division titles, which is 3 more than their bitter rivals Boca Juniors, and they have won the Copa Libertadores on 4 occasions. Former River Plate greats include the likes of Alfredo Di Stefano, Omar Savori, Daniel Passarella, and Hernan Crespo, among many others. River and Boca are to the Primera Division what Real Madrid and Barcelona are to La Liga, only with a little bit more Latin American ferocity thrown into the mix, and I think that River's relegation in 2011 is analogous to if Real Madrid or Barcelona were to get relegated from Spain's top flight during the 21st century. You could even argue that it is more shocking, owing to the fact that the Primera Division's confusing system for relegation, which consists of calculating each team's average points per game over the last 3 seasons, critics have suggested, is a way of preventing Argentina's Big Five from ever going down by insulating them if they have 1 or 2 bad seasons. Spurs, for example, would still be aided by their 4th place finish in the 2023-24 season if the same system were in place in the Premier League. River, however, quite astonishingly, after ending the 2008 Apertura bottom of the league table, a debt crisis and a change of president, ranks 17th out of 20 teams on a points per game basis over a rolling 3-year period at the end of the 2010-11 season. Even then, River were handed the lifeline of the Primera Division's promotion and relegation playoffs, where they faced a Belgrano de Córdoba team that had just finished 4th in Argentina's second tier. River Plate lost the tie 3-1 over 2 legs, in a result which sent shockwaves from the Rio de la Plata, which emanated around the entire world, and confirmed their first ever relegation. Riots broke out at the Estadio Monumental, with the police turning water cannons and rubber bullets on dissenting supporters, scenes which, whatever you think of the Met, and I happen to have some strong views that I can't say, seem unlikely to be replicated at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, whatever happens in the coming weeks. Spurs wouldn't be the biggest club ever to have been relegated then, nor would it be the most shocking relegation, to my mind, but they would be the richest club ever to have gone down. Spurs literally have higher revenue than Dortmund, Atletico Madrid, and any one of Italy's big 3, and their relegation probably should be considered almost as devastating owing to those financial disparities, as if any of those 5 were to go down. Anyway, that is it for today's video, not nearly as short as I have been instructed, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, hit the like button if you did enjoy it, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, but as I may have mentioned on occasion, also my second or personal channel, Alfie Potts Harmer, both of which should be about to appear on your screens any second now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on various social media platforms, typically via the username at HITC Sevens, and you can now support me additionally, should you be a real fan or just want to become part of that community, by becoming a channel member, either here on YouTube via the Alfie Potts Harmer YouTube channel, or via buymeacoffee.com/Alfie Potts Harmer, where you can do the exact same thing, but almost a third of it won't go to Google. That's all from me for today. I hope to see you all very shortly, here, there, or anywhere. Take care out there until then. I love you all very much. Cheers.